Hello and welcome back to Monster Monday. It's the last Monday in October, so we're sticking with the undead. You might be thinking to yourself, I'll bet Bill's got a real whopper for us. Maybe some epic undead, like a mummy or a vampire. Nope, ain't going there. We're going to the player's handbook for Monster Monday. If you're newer to D&D, and particularly 5th edition, you might not know that in the back of the book, there are a bunch of stat blocks for some commonly used creatures, beasts, and even monsters. Among those are two that I'll be focusing on today, the skeleton and the zombie. Now, these are probably the most commonly used undead monsters in the game. They're low level. They're easy to implement into an adventure scenario where you want to use undead, but you don't want to absolutely massacre the party. So I'm going to talk about why I think skeletons and zombies are versatile and how you could use them beyond just simple first level, second level, third level adventures. All right, there's a couple things that we need to understand about the differences between skeletons and zombies. At the core, a skeleton is basically an animated, magically animated set of bones. It might still have a little bit of flesh on it, but basically it's a magically animated set of bones. They are easy to kill, no doubt, right? They're considered a 1/4 challenge rating. On the other hand, you have zombies, which are corpses that are dead in various states of decay, also considered 1/4 challenge rating. The biggest difference is that the zombie has a special feature which we'll talk about called Undead Fortitude. And it kind of simulates zombie lore. Kind of simulates the idea that zombies are harder to kill. They just keep getting up. Skeletons, you kind of kill them and they stay dead. If you've ever followed my Monster Monday series, you know that one of the terms that I throw out frequently is scalability. That means you could take something that's low level and make it useful for mid-level or high-level encounters. On the flip, you could take something that's super powerful and scale it down. Now, how can we do this with skeletons and zombies? The easy math way is just adding in more hit points or more damage resistance or higher, attack and damage bonuses or more attacks. If you wanted to surprise players by throwing in a bunch of zombies or skeletons, you could certainly scale these very easily just by adding numbers, right? Giving them a higher AC, making them only vulnerable to magical attacks or to radiant damage, those kind of things. There are a lot of different DM tricks that we could do. But we have to also consider story, my friends. Why? Why would you take skeletons or zombies and upscale them to a mid or high level campaign when there's so many other undead options to choose from? That's where we get back to story. It has to take seed in the narrative that you build, and it has to fit within the world setting that you're using. So I'm going to share a little story with you. I'm going to share a little bit of lore from the world of Kekapulon. Many of you who've watched the D&D with high school students shows know that I run them in a part of my original world. And in that original world, there are very specific, powerful material items created by and left by the gods for mortals to tinker with. And you might know those as the elemental crystals: earth, wind, fire, water. And then the last category is void. Now, the void category is what I'm going to focus on today, because if you've kept up with your D&D with high school students throughout seasons 2, 3, B Team, 4, you'll know that the black orbs, the god crystals that represent the void, have an affinity with necromancy. They are tied to necromancy. And in effect, how I've used them, and not just in the D&D with high school students campaign, but in other campaigns, is that they are inherently, number one, evil. Number two, they are amplifiers. They are boosters to necromancy, necromantic magic, if you will. So in the world setting that I've created, these black crystals, the orbs, come in all shapes and sizes. And typically the smaller ones kind of give a smaller boost, the larger ones give a larger boost to that kind of magic. So what would it mean if a necromancer were using a common spell like Animate Dead, but they had it boosted? What does that mean? Well, as a DM, I thought of different ways that that could work mechanically. I thought, for example, that if you used a void crystal, a black orb, to amplify a spell like Animate Dead, you could animate more dead, maybe double or triple or quadruple the number of animated dead. So quantity, for example, it could impact your spell quantitatively to create more. Or maybe you could control more undead. Or maybe you can upscale the undead. So instead of quantity, you can affect quality through your necromantic magic. So maybe where your normal Animate Dead spell might animate a certain number of skeletons that are at 1/4 challenge rating and only have 2d8 plus 4 hit points, maybe depending on the size and scale of your black orb, you could create more powerful skeletons or more powerful zombies. So by building that into the lore, that's tied into potential adventure arcs and campaign arcs. Imagine, if you will, then, making these animated zombies and skeletons, the ones that were animated by or amplified through the magic used to amplify through the black orbs. Imagine, if you will, then, that those zombies or skeletons could not be killed by non-magical weapons. Or maybe you throw in could not be killed by any kind of magic except for radiant damage. So those are kind of some of the things that I've done and actually implemented in playtests of my games and in campaigns that I've run set in my original world over the last 20 years. Now, do you have to do that? Do you have to set your games in my world using black orbs? No. You can modify that and put it in your own context for any setting, right? All you do is, have some necromancer, have some kind of creatures maybe who have the ability to animate dead. But the point is that, you could have your basic level skeletons, your basic level zombies, and have a lot of fun with those. But if you wanted to upscale them, you could. And you could add in a variety of different elements, statistics, to kind of amplify those and make them more challenging at mid or high level. Now, frankly, it wouldn't be super realistic to have like a zombie or a skeleton that was, had like level 10 powers, right? So at high level, you're not really so much talking about completely upscaling a standard zombie or skeleton because we have plenty of other undead high-level monsters to choose from. But I do think that the quantity of upscaled skeletons and zombies could present an interesting story element. So for example, let's look at Game of Thrones, right? The Night King can animate the dead, and those dead are pretty fierce. Those are, they're not slow-moving zombies, they're runners, right? They can attack at full speed, they're vicious, they're brutal. So, you could take influence from something like that, and maybe, your big bad end guy has created super zombies that, can move really fast, have multiple attacks, have damage resistance, because basically when they go into combat, they take on a rage. They do more damage. If you wanted to make a zombie more challenging at higher level, you have an army of those. And all of a sudden, it's not just about wiping out the bad guys. It's about saving the innocent people from these bad guys. So just some kind of story thoughts, lore sharing that maybe will help you think about how you can take skeletons and zombies and make them your own. All right, let's look at the basic stat block. So in your player's handbook, the skeleton, as I said, armor class 13, 2d8 plus 4 hit points, movement speed of 30, which is interesting. We'll talk about that. So the skeleton is a little more nimble because it's magically animated bones. They have damage vulnerabilities to bludgeoning. In other words, you could do more damage against them, or better damage, I guess, with bludgeoning weapons. And this harkens back to first edition. I remember one of my earliest encounters with skeletons where the archer in the group was trying to shoot arrows and like it was a complete fail, right? The arrows would just pass through the bones or the rib cage and stuff. And that it was the cleric with the mace that was smashing at the skeletons that was doing the most damage. God, that might have been like 1980. Damage immunities to poison makes sense, right? You can't really poison a set of animated bones. Condition immunities to exhaustion or poisoned, they never stop because they're magically animated. They don't need to eat, sleep, or drink. They're like weak Terminators. Ooh, that's a good idea. See, you can take influence from anything. You know, the Terminator, the unstoppable force of killing, except this is very stoppable. Senses, dark vision, because magic. Languages, understands all languages it knew in life but can't speak. And then we have its potential actions, which are basically just weapon attacks. Short sword and short bow are the ones they give here. If you wanted to make a standard skeleton that was a little more challenging for, say, like a 3rd, 4th, 5th level party, you could have a whole bunch of them and have them actually wearing armor, number one, have them actually attacking with, you know, long swords instead of short swords, or long bows instead of short bows. So they do a little more damage, and they're a little harder to hit. So if you wanted to kind of do a minor upscale, but keep the basic stat block, add some armor, add some better weapons, and shazam, you have, you know, a slightly more challenging skeleton. Let's look at the zombie. So zombies have been a favorite of mine since the mid-'80s. In case you didn't know, I'm a huge zombie geek. Not only have I met George Romero, I interviewed him. And it was one of the great moments of my life to just be able to sit down with a director who I deeply admired. I mean, just, you know, that level of fandom colliding with my filmmaking world was awesome. But zombies in this game are weak initially. But as I said, you know, you could take zombies and look at them in a variety of different ways. If you look at zombies in movie genres, the Romero zombie, the Shambler, slow moving, but, you know, hard to kill because if you don't put one in the head, they keep coming at you. Let's look at the basic stat block here in 5th edition Player's Handbook. Armor class of 8. So compared to the skeleton, they're easier to hit. Hit points, 3d8 plus 9. So they have a little bit more on the hit point end. Speed is 20. So right there, that's kind of a little clue about how 5e depicts the common zombie. Slow moving. Slower moving than a small creature, like a halfling. Saving throws, damage immunities to poison, condition immunities to being poisoned. Kind of all the same stuff as the skeleton, but here's where it gets juicy. They have the special ability, Undead Fortitude. If damage reduces the zombie to 0 hit points, it must make a con save with a DC of 5 plus the damage taken, unless the damage is radiant or from a critical hit. On a success, the zombie drops to 1 hit point instead. So they built in a mechanic basically saying that, like, these are a little bit more challenging to keep down. And in a way, mechanically speaking, it kind of reminds me of trolls, like where, you know, you have to do some fire damage to keep them dead. Now, if I was going to go through the math on this, it must make a con saving throw with a DC of 5 plus the damage taken. They have a constitution of 16. So they make a con saving throw. The DC is 5 plus the damage taken. So let's say that they took 11 damage that knocked them down to below 0. So it'd be a 16 DC. 11 plus 5 is 16. And they have a +3 on their roll to beat a DC 16. So here's another way to look at it. If you just want to make it easy, you could roll a D6. And if they roll a 5 or a 6, it means they're not dead. You know, that's if you want to just speed it up. That way you take all the math and the saving throws out of it, and you just make it a little more like consistent, right? You roll a 5 or a 6 on a d6. If you roll a 5 or a 6, they pop back up the next round. This could continue on, theoretically, until they either don't make that roll or until somebody attacks them with radiant damage or from a critical hit. Their attack is a slam, +3 to hit, reach 5, 1 target, 1d6 plus 1 damage. Yeah. So let's talk about how do you modify this. You know, this is a very basic, I would say, kind of a Romero-esque zombie build. You can modify it, number one, by giving them more hit points. Their attack isn't really that threatening. The Undead Fortitude, I kind of talked about how you can make that a little more streamlined and easier. Instead of having to do the math every single roll, you just make it a roll of a d6. Here's what's missing. They don't have like an infected bite attack. That's one way where you can make your zombies a little more challenging for a mid-level party, is by having, you know, if they have a successful bite attack on you, you have to make a con save. Players, you have to make a con save versus a DC of whatever you decide to make it. And then if they fail, now you have the diseased condition. You want to make the zombies a little more deadly? Have that bite attack, and have that bite attack require a Constitution saving throw. Otherwise, they get zombie sickness. And the zombie sickness is basically whatever you're going to decide it's going to be, which is also kind of cool because it lets you modify things. You could throw, you know, the poison condition gives disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks, okay? You could do that. You could modify the disease to be more zombieific. I don't even know if that's a real word. But you could basically make it so that you combine little elements of poisoned and exhausted. Oh, that's a move. Maybe exhaustion. So level 1 exhaustion is disadvantage on ability checks. Level 2 is speed halved. Oh, that's what we do. That's what we do. There's your zombie bite effect. Because exhaustion has different levels. So maybe you set it up where if you fail your save against the zombie bite, you get zombie sickness, or whatever you want to call it. The first level is disadvantage on ability checks. The second is speed is halved. The third is disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. The fourth is hit point maximum is halved. 5 is speed reduced to 0, and 6 is death. So by the book, finishing a long rest reduces a creature's exhaustion level to 1. F that. I say only if they get a cure disease or like a restoration, one of those spells that like removes the zombie sickness. That's the only way they get out. Otherwise, every hour, they drop another level on the exhaustion. You want to go hardcore? So they get bit, the combat finishes up, they survive, they maybe get a cure light wounds that are healed or whatever, but they have disadvantage on ability checks. They just don't quite feel right, and they start to get a fever, they start to get nauseous, they start to get sick and weak feeling. Disadvantage on ability checks, speed halved. Every hour it goes to another level until it gets to level 6 is where they die. So 6 hours is how long they can live. Now if you want to make it nice, maybe you could say that their constitution modifier somehow extends the amount of time that they can have the zombie sickness before getting healed. But all of a sudden that puts a real damper on your adventuring, doesn't it? Especially if like all of the party members have been bitten by zombies and now have zombie sickness. See? Just by thinking outside of the box, that's a whole adventure right there. They weren't planning on having to go to find a town with a temple where they could get cure diseased or restored or whatever spell would work for that. But that's the point. Like, you make it challenging. It's not about it being a TPK. It's about being challenging. When I think of zombie movies, everybody's always fine in a zombie movie until you get bit. Then you're screwed, right? Day of the Dead. Dude gets bit. They chop off his arm with a machete. You know, they tie a tourniquet, chop off his arm with a machete so that, you know, they could stop the infection. Maybe that works. You know, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it gets into the bloodstream and and it spreads really fast. So you can't just chop off the limb where you got bit. Oh, that would be pretty dope. Imagine that backstory then. Why do you only have one hand? It's a long story. So I think you could think about zombies in other ways too. You know, you could take your 5e Player's Handbook zombie, which is kind of Romero-esque, slow-moving shambler. You could add the bite thing, sure. You could also just make them runners, you know, modern zombie movie style. Dawn of the Dead 2004. Or, you know, make them rage-filled zombies like 28 Days Later, that kind of zombie, you know, where they're hard to kill, but they also haul ass and they're full of rage, 5th edition rage, so they have damage, you know, resistance. They take half damage. You just club them and beat them and stuff, but they just keep coming, right? So make them fast moving, give them rage. Lots of different ways to play around with zombies to make them more challenging and to keep your party on their toes. But I think the biggest thing that we've omitted here is something to consider. It circles back to the narrative, people. It's about the story. It's about the feeling at the table. A lot of times we use undead, not just zombies and skeletons, undead as just another monster in a game. I want you to think deeper than that, friends. I want you to think about the horror. Now, close your eyes and imagine someone you deeply care for. Somebody in your family, a close friend, a parent, a sibling, and imagine that they have passed away. You're heartbroken. You're devastated. Now imagine shortly after they've passed away, your mind is still reeling from the loss. You're suffering from grief. That person gets up. They get up, but they're not the same. You try to talk to them. They come at you. They want to bite you. They want to devour your flesh. That should be terrifying. That should be terrifying. How, as a DM, do you bring that terror, that horror, that psychological turbulence into your D&D game to make your zombies more than just something that you roll a dice and you kill? You have to make it personal. You have to make it personal. You have to figure out a way for the players in the party to make a connection with NPCs and then to have them suffer, and then ultimately for the NPCs to come back as zombies, so that the players have to struggle with that. Their characters, they have to role play their character's reaction to seeing somebody they knew in life now return as a blank slate of emotion that is just a full throttle killing machine. That's a challenge. That's a straight challenge. It's a challenge even for me. It's easy to make zombies just, you know, moving flesh monsters that you destroy. But if you could figure out a way to make it personal, that opens up a whole bunch of story arcs, because now maybe the players have some skin in the game. Maybe they care. Maybe they don't want this to happen to other people. Maybe as heroes, they want to find the source behind this. Who is bringing back the dead? And why? And maybe they decide that they want to stop whoever is doing this. Thus begins your hero's quest. So hopefully this month of October has been informative and helpful in your consideration of the undead. For me, it's one of my favorite categories of encounters, and I think it's across many gaming genres. I have seen and played undead in D&D, in games like Vampire the Masquerade, of course, in Call of Cthulhu, in Monster of the Week, in lots of different gaming genres. You can have undead. They're pretty available, they're pretty accessible, and easily modifiable to make it fit with your vibes, with your table. So, until next time, keep your games tight.
They're coming, we have to go.
So I guess we just take a stroll downtown.
Well, hello, it's me, Wizzy. I'm back once again to remind you to subscribe and click on the notifications button, and also watch videos that are over there. And then don't forget to tune in to the next episode of whatever show you were just watching, and crafting videos and DM tips and pro tips for vlogging and all sorts of gaming things. And also you could watch Bill eat food and watch other shows featuring Bill. He made me say that because he's a narcissist. Okay, bye.